set.
Okay, great. So I normally open these up with giving you a chance to do a personal professional check-in where you can share something with the audience they might not know about you. And I did want to thank you for being on Winning Wednesday. It really means a lot to me to have someone part of Gen Z be so present on LinkedIn. You know, you're really taking advantage of the platform, and I'm excited to dive into that with you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me on, and it's a pleasure to join you today.
Great. So if you were to share something with the audience that they might not know about you already, where would you start?
It's a good question, and it's difficult because I share almost everything. I share workouts, I share like things I'm reading, things I'm doing to increase like cognitive performance, obviously all of my work. I would say something that I might share with other people that they might not know about me is that I'm an absolute cheapskate. I mean, I do not spend money on anything. I refuse to spend money on $7 coffees, avocado toast. I mean, I hardly even eat out. It's even with COVID and like the delivery, like DoorDash, it's so convenient and it's awesome and it's still pretty cheap. But I'm a Costco shopper. Like, I think there's this notion that if you're like a young entrepreneur, or especially someone who is going to be like a very conversationalist male, like white dude, like that's typically the people that are spending money on useless stuff and like nice cars. And I drive a 2004 Nissan Xterra that I've had since I was 16, that I paid for through lawn mowing. So I think that's something that people would probably not understand. The only time I'll ever spend money on something is if it saves me time.
I love that. And I think the audience would definitely appreciate seeing how much character building those things bring into your life, because that's really setting you apart from your peers, I would say.
Yeah, certainly. I think something that I've come to grasp really early on in my career is just this notion that there's no amount of money I can make within the next 10 years that if I had spent that same time making whatever that dollar amount is, if I had spent that in career development and learning and growth, that I wouldn't be able to make that over my lifetime. And so I think once I understood that, it became more of a lesson about, look, the goal here is not just to learn more, so not only are you more intelligent person, and thus you have better relationships with people and your life tends to go better the more intelligent you are, but it's also one that if your end goal is to make money, which for a lot of people, unfortunately, that is the case, you know, whether they want to say it or not. For myself, not so much, but if that's your end goal, it's also a really ROI positive investment as well. So maybe spend 3 less hours a day working and spend that time towards career and personal development.
Right. And I had a guest on Winning Wednesday that shared that we're basically our greatest assets. So if we're not investing in ourselves, you know, a paycheck that you can get from an employer is probably more reliable than if you try to create a hustle out of thin air and hope that that will bring home 6 figures one day, you know? And I think people have this misconception or a fantasy world about what being an entrepreneur is.
Yeah.
And you're kind of breaking that a little bit, you know, by saying, hey, it's not all glamorous. I can't just blow my money however I want.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that entrepreneurship is so glorified, and rightly so. I mean, I love everything we do, and I love our company, and I couldn't see myself doing anything else. But also, at the end of the day, it's not for everyone, and it's quite daunting. And if I didn't have the overhead where I did, where my overhead was, you know, just incredibly low, and I could live cheap, and we're in an industry where there's not a high barrier to entry, you know, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so, you know, I think there's this notion that entrepreneurship is so great and that side hustles are so great and so on. When in reality, I know people who have full-time jobs and are 45 years old and they made an incredible career for themselves, and they wouldn't have it any other way. It's always the grass is always greener on the other side. And I think that's something that is really toxic among younger generations, is this notion that like entrepreneurship is the greatest thing ever because Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and Gary Vee are some godlike characters, which, yeah, well, certainly like that can be the case in terms of media and press. I don't think a life worth living, nor exploring, nor being ambitious for, with kind of that goal in mind is one that's headed in the right direction. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's overrated, and I think it needs to be a narrative that is rewritten.
I love that. And you touched on the low barrier to entry, right? So we see people becoming influencers kind of overnight, and they're getting so much more traction and publicity than in the past that was reserved for our entertainment people and celebrities in the world and politicians. So now that you have anyone becoming an influencer, it seems that their entitlement is also a bit different than in the past, right? And you don't necessarily appreciate what they have. So can you expound on that? It looked like you tilted your head, so I think something came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's two layers to it. One, in working with a lot of brands and also working with a lot of influencers, is that I find it mesmerizing and embarrassing for large brands when I chat with 19-year-olds that have more followers across all their social channels and will generate more impressions, which this isn't about social media. This is like what your brand is, because if you're not spending on programmatic and all these other media, it's like, where are you actually being seen? And with retail going away, are you even seen on the shelf, or is it done through one of the 30 apps that exist that can do that, and so on. So that's one side of it. Is I find it embarrassing that corporations with billions of dollars will let 19-year-olds with a decent camera just flat out beat them in this media game. And then the flip side of it is that entitlement. I don't think it's one of influence and nor barrier to entry, because I think low barrier to entries are actually really beneficial, because if that entitlement remains ultimately, then even if there's a lower barrier to entry, it means you get in, and then your entitlement is going to be the reason you're ultimately going to lose within that, because at some point it will bite you in the ass. I don't really think entitlement's the problem within the influencer, nor just like low barrier to entry space. I think it's just a problem of what happens when the world is in a better place than we've ever seen before. And I say that at a macro level, obviously not this year in particular. But the reality is, for those born in the United States, within the Gen Z demographic and even millennial, there's never been an easier time. And that'll be the case for decades. I mean, this always happens. This is human evolution at its finest. It's just happening at an accelerating pace that we're able to see within our generation, see it unfold. So I think it's a much larger national problem that exists within Europe, within the United States, within first world economies. And I think it's one that, when I think about the future of business, of innovation, of entrepreneurship, it's a global one. There are more Gen Z right now in India than there are all of the generations combined here in the US. So when you take things like that into account, and then when you work with individuals across the world, we have a team of 9 right now in the Philippines. They're some of those hardworking kids I've ever worked with. And it's not just monotonous, BS work. I mean, they are working on some of our biggest projects, and they'd probably be working on all of them if we had an office there, which I'm actively working on. So, yeah, I don't think entitlement is a massive problem. I don't think it comes from like influence necessarily, but I do think it's a problem that needs to be addressed soon.
Okay, great. And when I say entitlement, it's not necessarily that you're entitled to make something of yourself, right, and create your personal brand. It's kind of what you do with the following after you have those connections. I see a lot of people taking it for granted. So have you experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it firsthand, both on the business side of things, where like people start making a little bit of money in business, getting an influence, selling courses now and other things of that nature, like, which again, I have no problem with if that's like what you're actually passionate about. But if you're just selling it to make money, that doesn't always make sense to me. So I've seen it there, and then you get crazy with the money. And then I've also seen it like on the influencer side. Like, I think it's the expectation, and I think it's a double-edged sword, and one that causes problems on both sides, really, because it's entitlement on one end of you are expecting people to desire, to want to give you their attention, because that's been the norm, right? But it's also that same expectation that gets them out of that rhythm of creating what is actually beneficial. And I see it happen all the time on social media platforms, where you get to a certain level, and once you're there, now your standard has risen. And oh my God, I have 1 million followers now. I can't like do this thing that I used to do because the quality's not there. When in reality, it was the thing you used to do that got you to that point in the first place. And so I think it's just a matter of understanding those balances that exist, but there's certainly an insane level of entitlement that happens once you have that influence. And it's really important to note. I love our head of social media here, Amanda Johansson, was one of the first influencers on the TikTok platform, and this is when it was Musical.ly, and she's got 2 million followers on it, and OG. I mean, before Charli D'Amelio was even on the platform, and she came to us in February, January this year, and she wanted a job with us and to work with us and to lead our social media. And meanwhile, I knew she was getting paid so much more money than we could ever offer her working with brands. So I asked her, I was like, well, why did you make that decision? And what she told me is, this isn't going to last forever, and I know that. And she's really smart understanding that, when 99% of all influencers simply don't. So she's doing it the smart way, now working with incredible brands like McDonald's, North Face, Denny's, and others. And
Right.
I think other influencers need to realize that too.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sorry about my cat.
No worries at all.
So yeah, I mean, you touched on it perfectly, because I think people they're not familiar with the influencer status, and they don't know if it's necessarily a metric of success and if it will prevail. So to your point, it's great that she has that foresight, recognizing that it won't last forever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people are short-sighted on it. For instance, I had someone, I don't even know how many followers she has on TikTok, but she's building her brand up, and I asked her if she would come and speak with me, and she wanted to charge me like $3,000 to come to Verizon. And I'm like, Verizon is a huge network for you, and you're being so short-sighted by missing this opportunity. But
to make what? $3,000, right? Like, what is that going to do for you?
$3,000, yeah. And it's like, that's not sustainable anyway, to your point. And to miss the bigger picture, I think is really kind of a risk right now, when people think that their following is everything, because these platforms can all disappear, right? And what influence would you have at that point? Especially on TikTok, it's very hard to translate that following, those connections.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why an omni-channel strategy is so vital. And also a strategy that's not just derived from getting views, engagements, likes, but what is the actual ROI on that platform? If it's B2B, if it's personal, that's a little bit different. But if it's B2C, then what are the sales that are being driven through the platform? And no, it's never going to be direct attribution, but with some attribution modeling, it's pretty easy to figure out where that's actually coming from. And I think so many go into it and they're like, well, our followers went up and this, that, and the other, but how did that actually increase and influence sales? And there's some posts you can make, for example, that maybe it only gets 10 likes on Instagram, but it leads to 2 sales, whereas the one with 100 likes leads to no sales at all. And that's happening every day, and I think we're not doing the adequate job we need to from a strategy standpoint in actually setting up what is the purpose of doing what we're doing.
So what would a good strategy look like? Or are you saying that's what people need to solve for?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that people need to solve for. And from my perspective, what a good strategy needs to look like on social, which it's going to be dependent on the brand no matter where you are. But first, there needs to be an overlying goal. And that goal can't become popular on social media, because that is a really stupid goal. Because there's no ROI nor value in that. And so whenever a client approaches us with that, they're like, hey, I want to get millions of followers on TikTok. And we're like, okay, we can do that. Why? Why do you want to do that? That's so random. That makes no sense. But I think there's a stigma and just stereotype in the social media realm that's what you go for. So I would say you need to align with a bottom line goal. Is it to grow market share within Gen Z? Is it to increase our sales happening online, so our retail to online presence a little better, direct to consumer, so on? Then what you need to do is, based on that goal, set up actual data tracking and analytics and attribution modeling that allows you to ultimately determine and score that goal. Because the inherent problem of social is the majority of all actual social conversions are going to happen outside of it. And so even the ads you're running, yes, they're tracking CPC, and that's great and all, but what are the people who clicked on it, then went back, then went and Googled it and purchased it on Amazon? Those are real scenarios that happen, or told their friend about it, or posted on the Instagram story, and so on. Those are the real life things that happen that we can't track for. So then set up the right modeling, and then inside the platform, set up the KPIs and always be testing those to see how those affect each part of the puzzle. It can't be one of those things where we have like social media over here and they answer to KPIs around impressions and what are our clicks and what are our clicks and then conversions on this one ad set, and influencer campaign, so on, and then sales and our actual goal over here, and we treat them separate. It needs to be connected and all the details and KPIs along the way.
Yeah, so to your point, typically marketing and sales don't get along with each other, right? Marketing's constantly talking at sales, and sales is like, you don't understand what we go through. So do you see that in your space too, or have you found a way to synergize the two?
Yeah, I mean, in our experience, bridging that sales and marketing dilemma is something that's going to be vital to any operation, and it's more than just sales too, because to me, when I look at like some of the best marketing departments I know and how they operate, the ones that are like farthest away from dealing with the red tape of their organization tend to operate the best. And so the more that they can avoid CFO, COO, CSO, any of those individuals, I'll say, that are ultimately going to bog and slow things down and set their own KPIs, the better. So marketing being able to operate in its own creative kind of entity and not answer to sales for frankly things that just don't even make sense. But then when it comes to working together, I think it's allowing both sides to see the value in the other, which from my biased perspective, we on the marketing side have a very clear understanding of like the importance of sales, especially in the B2B realm. But I think the sales side doesn't always have that same knowledge base nor understanding of the marketing side, and I think that's where problems arise. And even bigger than that, leadership, whether it's CEO, founder, COO, whoever's running the show, if they don't have a good understanding of marketing or brand, then you're going to be doomed from the start, because then it's going to become a transactional sales game. Who can get these numbers in this short 90-day window, rather than an actual brand marketing game. Then you're going to look up 5 years later and wonder what the hell happened to your market share, and your marketing team will have already left and joined agencies because they're way more fun to work for than brands. So that's some of the dilemma there. And in my experience, it's just like you got to have the right leadership in place, and then in terms of working together, both sides just have to understand each other at a deeper level.
Yeah, and like you said, from a sales perspective, looking at marketing, because it's so hard to track those daily behaviors, it's hard to point to marketing and be like, you're the reason why the deal closed. And sales, again, they look at things transactionally. So that's the panic button that you hit at the end of the month, and that's your strategy, but it's not a strategy, It's not long term. It's just a panic. So I had wanted to ask you, right? I wrote on here, like, what makes you a Gen Z expert, but I feel like you're just proving that with everything that you say one after another. So I'm more curious what brought you to caring so much about your generation and getting you to this point.
Yeah, I mean, the big reason I care about our generation, and I wouldn't say by any means I'm like the Gen Z expert, or I am a Gen Z expert. I just happen to exist within this generational cohort, which is no different than if we were to segment it out where every 5 years was a different generation and so on. So I think oddly enough, like my vision on it is a little bit unique and almost pessimistic. But for myself, it's a matter of, I've always had just natural tendencies and behaviors that are kind of equipped within me that allow me to speak up and to say something and to be able to create action towards it. And a large part of our generation just simply doesn't know how to translate those thoughts and ideas and spoken words and all over on social media into actual action. And I'm always someone that I'm always like, you show me it, don't tell me about it. Show me it, because I don't want to hear it. I want to see the actual result. I don't want to hear about you supporting this movement. I want to see what you're doing to actually make a difference. And I don't want you to talk about how you want to make the world a better place, or that you just, you post a video of you recycling or buying these sustainable shoes. Like, just be a good person if that's your actual goal. So for me, I think it was a matter of taking action, and I feel that my job for Gen Z is to be almost the hype man, where I come out on stage before and get everyone hyped, and I make a ton of noise, and I'm probably annoying the hell out of the crowd, which I definitely am all the time. And then I let Gen Z come on next, and they give their show, because now the crowd's hyped up and people listen. So that's really my job. I don't make the answers. my political, social, so on views are not indicative nor reflective of Gen Z. I just want to be the spark that gets the attention.
Okay, awesome. And when you were describing that, I was thinking about the fact that on TikTok, for instance, Gen Z will uncover all these like hidden truths, right? Like freeing Britney and things like that. And it's like, how did that become the brand of Gen Z? Like, where did that even come from? And why are you guys, better at uncovering those things than anyone that has been around technology for so much longer?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell you exactly why. I think it's a couple things. I think for one, it's their fascination with mystery and conspiracy in a generation that is so pessimistic with the brands they grew up with. Only 56% trust the brands that they grew up with. So a good percentage at least have no trust for even the brands that they grew up with, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of like their fascination with that and just not willing to trust corporate organizations or how the system is currently operating, and sometimes being the annoying 12-year-old that asks why whenever you give an answer. And then the other side of it, I think, is like tech enablement and their understanding of it at a much deeper level than even millennial counterparts. And if you ever get a chance and can watch a millennial versus a Gen Z scroll on their phone for about 30 minutes, you'll see what I mean. They're going to go on very similar platforms. They're going to send similar texts. They're going to say similar words. But when you look at the really unique behaviors and what they're doing and how fast Gen Z is typing through all this stuff versus millennial even, you'll understand like how drastically different these generations are. And so this is the generation that exists digitally, and if they want to find information out about just about anything, they will hunt that information down and then they'll expose it. So it's interesting to say the least, but I think it's for the better.
Yeah, it's definitely part scary and part the accountability that we need, going forward, because people can't hide anymore. And it's really good to find out what these corporations stand for, and why the brands aren't something to be trusted, in your opinion. And I think that that's so different, from how I grew up, for instance, like Abercrombie and Fitch and Hollister and all that was like, you just do the brand because it looks nice or it's expensive or something like that. And no one ever cared about what the founders were doing or how, misogynistic and racist they were. Like that never came into the conversation. So it's very interesting how the dynamics are shifting. And then, so you had mentioned earlier omni-channel, right? And like building out your brand in different capacities. What is it about LinkedIn that draws you to that platform specifically?
Yeah, to me, it's the natural organic reach that exists in the form of written copy. That just doesn't exist elsewhere, because I think copywriting and your ability to tell stories through words is, that's such an underrated skill, I think, in today's world, in which I'm all for photo and video, and 99% of everything we do is that. But I think that's a really underrated skill. But yeah, the organic reach attracts me a lot. The other thing is the mindset of the consumer on the platform, which this is why I actually recommend a lot of consumer brands jump into LinkedIn. I know it's obviously B2B, like at its core, and it's networking and whatever, but I actually really recommend a lot of consumer brands to get on there, because your consumer mindset on LinkedIn is just so much different than it is on other platforms. You're not necessarily in like a mindless scroll mode. You're not necessarily there just to click on a ton of different things or to see or even to see your friends, because when you go on LinkedIn, you're not seeing your friends, you're seeing business people and colleagues and so on. So to me, it's the mindset of the consumer is in such a more valuable place, because you are thinking a lot less emotionally, a lot more logically. So that's from a marketing and advertising perspective, it makes things a lot easier to reach new consumers and portray a message, versus on a different platform where, and this is kind of my final piece, which is competition. So when I go on Instagram right now, say I make a post about hey, this is what your TikTok strategy needs to be, and I post it to Instagram and LinkedIn. Well, LinkedIn, that makes sense. It's going to stand out. It's got me spewing and yelling about it and so on, and so that gets a kind of a clickbait, and then I'm talking about TikTok, which is unique, and marketing and so on. Whereas on Instagram, the way it exists on that platform is it's that video there, but above it is super attractive person number one, and below that is super attractive person number 2, and so on. And so as you're going through that feed that exists, oh, and by the way, if you're not following me, you're probably not going to see that post because it's not going to make it to the Explore page, whereas on LinkedIn it will. And so it's just you're competing differently. For us on LinkedIn, I'm competing against someone who is 65 years old writing some post about a Peter Drucker quote that he just read in some book that he just read like for the 30th time this year. So that's kind of the difference. It's where can you stand out, and LinkedIn's the best way to do so right now.
Awesome. And a lot of people on LinkedIn, they caution brands and individuals from selling proactively on the platform, and then they rely more on the individual person's account versus the company account. So do you agree with that perspective, or do you have a different one?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The personal brands are going to outperform the company pages. That being said, there still is a time and place for company pages. It's something we've talked about internally and with some of our client partners on the platform. But ultimately, we're just seeing so much success with personal brands that spending even 30 seconds to think about the company side of things is frankly just a waste of time. Because people are going to buy from people first and foremost, and people are far more interesting than logos and colors and taglines, right? So that's what I'd say. And then in terms of selling, I never think you should lead with a sale or with anything of that nature. But I don't think people on LinkedIn throw enough right hooks. I don't think they provide enough opportunities to engage with them, and myself included, because I hardly do anything to actually promote our business, what we do, how you could work with us if you want to. We get a ton of inbound from the LinkedIn platform, but I really don't do anything of that nature. So I think just ask for the right hooks that provide value, not getting on a sales call or a consultation. And doing something of that nature. But ultimately, that's what I'd advise.
And it's ironic that you mentioned that, because I was thinking, I don't specifically know what you do or how anyone would work with you or what your ideal client is.
Exactly.
So you're creating hype and people want to talk to you, but they don't necessarily know how that translates. And so from this conversation, you're saying that you create the hype for the rest of your team or your sales team to come in, but what's that bridge look like? And what is the ideal client for Trendsetters?
Yeah, so the ideal client for us is one that is in one of 2 categories. One, they know that their end consumer is going to be likely Gen Z, and they need to reach them. And 2, they don't know that their end consumer is Gen Z when it actually is. And if they want to remain in business, they need to. And so we work at both the startup, SMB, mid-size, company level, all the way to Fortune 500 brands, some of the ones I mentioned before. And each project is unique in how we go about doing so, whether it's strategy or marketing. But long story short, we're an ad agency, but with Gen Z. So take Mad Men, get rid of the sexism and all the other problems that existed there, and pair it with Gen Z, which is super altruistic and super friendly and going to be all about everyone's pronouns and such, and that's our agency. So it's a really unique environment and a really unique setup, but one that is really uniquely positioned, and it shows in the work we do.
I love that. And you mentioned, the half of the audience are the people that don't know that they're trying to target Gen Z.
Yeah.
So is there an easy way to differentiate that? And for instance, LinkedIn just added in those stories at the top. Is that something that people should be pursuing, or because it's a professional platform, steer clear of it?
Yeah, so when it comes to understanding if you do in fact need to be reaching Gen Z, it's a question of, do you want to be in business over the next decade? Which isn't to say that you can't rely on a product that only sells to 65 and up, because plenty do, and they do great. But for the majority of brands, especially on the consumer side, if you're not evolving to reach Gen Z, you're not just going to miss out on Gen Z, you're actually going to lose their older counterparts in Millennial and Gen X as well. Because what becomes popular among Gen Z consumers then becomes popular with Millennials, and then becomes popular with Gen X, the parents, and so on, and it scales up. In 2010, only 10 years ago, Facebook was only for college students. And now 10 years later, my grandma and grandpa spend more time on that platform than I will ever spend on that platform in just one day. And that's only a 10-year difference. I was, 10 years old then, now I'm 20, and so it's not like I'm the 65-year-old. So I guess with that in mind, it's understanding that. And then, on the stories note, I think stories are going to be a really great addition to LinkedIn, but I think it's going to take about a month. Because right now, what I've seen thus far is just a lot of very boring stuff, or people treating it like Instagram. What it really needs to be is either short, quick business advice relevant to what you're doing, or it needs to be like showing you actually working, but not like working from home. Here's a picture of my computer and a coffee, but like here's a meeting that I recorded 15 seconds of, and you get behind the scenes. And if you're a B2B brand, LinkedIn Stories is going to be an absolute game changer for you.
That's awesome. And I think so many people are so hesitant all the time. I mean, I hear it from my colleagues constantly, like they're afraid to put their face out there, their voice out there. They don't want to do videos, even internally, they don't turn their camera on all the time. And that's not even recorded, and it's not published anywhere. So I think there does need to be that shift in mindset and a willingness to try new things instead of always being against it, because I feel like these things will happen regardless. So whether you're on board or not, they're still going to, gain that traction. And if anything, you'll be left behind if you don't take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think those that oppose anything new inherently before at least giving it a chance, I think that's very indicative of like where you'll be headed. Because, and I've always said to our team, like, I can't wait until I'm the 55-year-old dude that is so pissed off about all these young Gen Alpha, so maybe Gen Beta agencies, like, and I'm sure I'll be the grumpiest man in the world at that point, just being through the game for that long, and so, yeah, I mean that's kind of what I think about it. You just have to have a proactive, positive approach towards it, and understand that like LinkedIn would not implement stories if it didn't know it would be successful.
Yeah. And on one of your posts that you had put, I forget what the question was to the audience, but someone had commented, these older generations on LinkedIn specifically tend to only post if it's a humble brag. So they look at it as a glorified resume, instead of like your day-to-day or anything else, or just adding content for the sake of it. As you mentioned, even on stories, sharing a few business tips or showing you an action in the meeting and things like that, where you kind of break down that wall and you can see the human side, but instead they'll post like, hey, I just won this trophy, or I got this award for XYZ, and you'll see them surface maybe once a month or once every 3 months. So how does that, like we're seeing everything go in a different direction with the younger generation.
Yeah.
And how can maybe the older generations get on board with that and feel more comfortable with it? Or is it the right approach specific to each generation?
What I find so funny about this one is that growing up, something I always admired, that I found this was weird, but I always admired in like, whether it was like parents, uncles, family members, friends, parents and such, I always look up to older individuals that could tell really good stories. And even if it like didn't, like they just know how to set it up and you're hooked, the whole time. I always found that mesmerizing. And for our older generations, they tell stories a lot better than younger generations typically. They got more to talk about. They've told more stories and such. And so what's ironic is that the problem with older generations right now in adapting to social is their ability to do modern day storytelling. And that's what's lacking. And that's what's lacking on social media, because they're always going to have a plethora of wisdom and experience. And maybe they're a little bit jaded about it, and maybe they have to humble brag a little bit because they didn't end up where they wanted to and so on. But for the most part, they have so much insight and experience. And what's funny is if you get a 30-minute coffee with them sometime, you can quickly learn that, but then their ability to compose that into a modern story just isn't there. So the same disconnect that young individuals, if you ever had a young person try to tell you a story, myself included, it's the most annoying thing ever. And it doesn't make any coherent sense, and it's something I need to work on. But it's the same problem that exists with older generations. There's just a gap between how do you actually storytell. Meanwhile, 12-year-olds figure out how to create TikToks that I even struggle with figuring out how to do because they're just natural content creators. So I think that's what it is. It's can you tell stories in the modern era?
Right, and you do have to be very concise, right, and capture that attention very quickly, and then get your point across without going in a million different directions. And I think that when people are rehashing their experience, there's always a lot of touch points that occur. So they go down this rabbit track and that one, instead of just getting to the point.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, thank God for the Zoom era for that. I can't tell you how many times we'll be in a conversation, maybe just an intro or just chatting about whatever with an older individual that has been through the years and wants to give us some advice. And I mean, we at some point we just have to mute the call and we just look at each other and we're like, what are we doing here? Because I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm taking notes, right? So yeah, I think that's a funny one for sure.
So if people want to work with Gen Zers, what should they be doing on those calls?
Yeah, so I mean, for one, I think setting an actual meeting agenda, which seems strange because structure tends to not be like whole total millennial Gen Z thing, but it's important to know like why we're having that conversation. People expect things from the meetings they go into, not just like a touch base that could have been done through email or even better Slack. So that's one. And the second, I would say just like clarity, getting to the point, and then transparency. And this is something I see in like HR conversations that really eats at me is the amount of like sugarcoating that happens within the HR realm around employment. And I get it. Like it's this sacred thing. It's the job. It's so important. But your younger employees don't see it like that. And that's why turnover rates are so high, and that's why they go start their own businesses and they have the side hustle and they do the podcast and they do the show and they do the other things, because to them life is more than just that job and then their family, right? And so I think more employers especially, but in any context of a situation within some sort of conversation, you just need to be brutally honest and transparent and not tiptoe around it and just tell it as it is, because that's ultimately gonna do what is best for that individual. But I think the problem is that Gen X kind of baby boomer, even older millennial era, grew up with quote unquote professionalism, which to me, professionalism in a lot of ways is nothing more than just a facade so I can avoid having to tell you the actual truth, which sounds much worse, but if I say it in this way, it's somehow nice. And I've never understood that. So I think that's some of the problems that need to be fixed in order to better communicate across generations.
Right, I agree with you. And I think, so I'm new to corporate about a year and a half in, and so I picked up on that talk track right away, right? Because they use this vernacular where you're like, oh my God, I need to watch everything I say going forward, because my last role, I could just say whatever I wanted. But what I found is that within the corporate talk track and that structure is that you do take a second to kind of think about what you're saying and try to find a respectful way of saying it.
Yeah.
So maybe it is veiled in a lot of different words, and you have to, they say everything from a high level, so you never really get to the point.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a good balance to have between there, because you do need to be direct and get to the point, but you have to say it in a nice way, because at the end of the day, we all do need each other. We need to collaborate. We'll not be successful on our own, because even if you have your own business, you still need a customer, right?
Yeah.
And if you're rude to your customer, especially in today's era, you will be out of business before you know it.
Yeah, I mean, a future is going to be better together the more we can communicate across generations and align on the same goals. And so, even being a Gen Z agency and all the jokes we make about boomers and so on, which are plenty, at the end of the day, we wouldn't be here had it not been for the success of every generation prior and all the great work they've done. And so, for us, we need to have the humility to understand that we're young, we don't know what the hell we're talking about, and that we can learn a lot. And I think for older generations, it's a matter of being at least willing to listen, which I see a lot of improvements in this arena, and I think it's something that will continue and hopefully get better for generations to come.
I love that. And we're coming up on time. I just wanted to give you a chance to share anything else that's on your mind, and also if you can leave some type of positive, actionable item for the audience to implement right away based on your experience, either in life in general or specific to COVID.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in terms of closing remarks, I think overall, the LinkedIn LinkedIn presents a lot of unique opportunities when it comes to reaching Gen Z. Just understanding that approach and philosophy about doing so. We talked a lot about the HR side of things and internal comms. So I think, yeah, I don't know what the summary should be, but something along those lines. And then, I would say in terms of like any actionable advice, for one, I would jump into LinkedIn right away if you're not already, and not like jump into LinkedIn like everyone else and not do anything, but jump into LinkedIn, become a creator, start sharing your story. Once you get access to stories, start sharing stories as well on the LinkedIn platform. So that's number one. And number two, with COVID, I would say continue to use this opportunity to get ahead. The reality is the world's slowing down, and nothing happening right now, especially in the media, appears good. But this is a really great time to look internally at yourself and focus on you, focus on your career. And so use this time while everyone else is slowing down to speed up. And that's what we've done as an organization. We've seen more growth within this COVID-19 window than we have in our entire existence. Granted, we haven't been in business that long, but still. So yeah, I mean that's my probably last piece of advice, is to continue pushing, and if anything, speed up.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Jake. And I loved having you on. So I'm going to stop the recording. And I just wanted to let you know also that you are a really good storyteller. So it's ironic that you feel like you can't, but you're very compelling.
Thank you. I always wonder, I think it's just those that have had to listen to me a lot. Probably. Yeah. Carter, what would you say? Yeah. It literally is what it is. That's true. Thank you, though.
Yeah, no, definitely. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And then when do you think that I would be able to get a copy of that?
Like 40 minutes, because I might color read it.
40 minutes. 40 minutes, that's what I heard.
Yeah, that's fine.
So like an hour.
Okay, and did you want to see it before it gets published or no?
No.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions for me, or?
That's it for now. When you publish it out, just let me know, and I'll be sure to cross-promote it as well. And if there's anything else I can do for you, we'd love to help. And thanks so much for the opportunity. Hopefully I wasn't... Yeah, did we get everything answered?
What was that?
Did we get everything answered?
Yeah, we did. It was fantastic, and you added so many other things too. So I kind of just like went however you were snaking through the conversation, but it was really, really good. So thank you for doing that. And I was just gonna share. So I have like a pipeline of recorded footage already, so I'll be posting that over the next few weeks, and then this will be part of like season 3 of Winning Wednesdays. So that'll be, I think, November, December. So it'll be like a little far out. If you wanted to post something in between, that's up to you, but I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Cool. Thanks so much. We'll probably chop up some of this footage, and if we post it sooner, I don't know. We'll see. I'll let you know if we end up chopping any of this, because
that's fine.
I want to tag you in it, but I also don't want to like promote the show and such if it's not out yet. So let me. Right. Okay, I'll figure out how we'll plan that.
That's fine, and you can tag me, and we could just leave it at that. It doesn't matter. Cool. But I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Likewise. Talk to you soon.
Bye.